Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. A little bit of a historic game in Lexington, Kentucky. The first ever game in SEC play in the 16-team SEC era. So this is the SEC opener for the entire conference as the Kentucky Wildcats get set to host South Carolina. Kentucky is a 10.5-point favorite in this game. The over-under actually ticking down over the course of the week. I think it opened up at about 46.5, 47, something like that. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that it's about 43.5 right now as we record here in the middle of the week. In terms of these two teams, in terms of week one, listen, from the Kentucky perspective, you saw pretty much everything you were hoping to see. If anything, the only complaint about week one is you were hoping to see more of it. That's right. You show up at the stadium, Southern Miss, season opener. Everybody's excited. The Brock Vandagriff era is kicking off in Lexington. And then what ends up happening? Oh, I don't know. How about a 3-hour weather delay? Finally kick off about 10 p.m. Eastern time. Credit to all of the Kentucky fans who stuck around. We had it on in the Fox Sports Radio studios. It looked packed when the game kicked off on the SEC network at about 10 p.m. Eastern. You look awesome in the first half. The second half starts, and then boom, another weather delay. And all of a sudden, just like that, the game is called in the middle of the second quarter. So like I said, you didn't see as much as you wanted, but I think everything you saw, you got to be happy with. First of all, I mentioned Brock Vandagriff, and this is an exciting time for Kentucky, right? Because, listen, I'll say this, is that I was one of the people at this time last year that probably overhyped Devin Leary coming into the season at Kentucky. So I was cautiously optimistic about what I had heard about Brock Vandagriff in camp and everything in the lead up to the season. Didn't want to overhype him like I did last year, but he looked awesome in game one against Southern Miss. 12 of 18 passing, 169 yards, 3 touchdowns. The one thing that you can't deny about Kentucky, and this is a conversation that has bothered me for years. There's been this notion, even dating back to when Will Levis got drafted, oh, they don't have NFL talent on the outside. Yeah, they do. We saw it on Saturday. I know, by the way, back when Will Levis was playing a couple of years ago, these guys were young. But Berrien Brown, 4 catches, 2 touchdowns. Dane Key looked awesome as that's not a surprise to anyone who's followed his career. And then Jamori Macklin, the transfer from North Texas, looks good as well. So that receiver core is actually really good, probably one of the more underrated ones in the SEC. As I said, the passing game was there. You got to be excited. And I think from a defensive perspective, you got to be excited as well. No points allowed. It goes without saying, 131 yards of total offense in a little over 2.5 quarters. So the defense was clicking. The offense was clicking. The one thing worth noting coming into this game, Chip Trainum, the transfer from Ohio State, is banged up, will not play in this game. So we'll see how it affects the running game. In terms of South Carolina, listen, let me say this. You know, I've said it a million times. I'm not here to criticize individuals off the field as husbands, fathers, dads, whatever. Never been a Shane Beamer guy. Never understood the hype. Never thought he was that good. I think bluntly, Spencer Rattler covered up a lot of deficiencies in that program last season. They finished 5-7. I did not have high expectations coming into this year because you don't have an established quarterback. You lose Xavier Leggett, obviously the first-round pick to the Carolina Panthers at wide receiver. The defense last year, I don't think people realize, last in the SEC in run defense, last in the SEC in tackles for loss, last in the SEC in sacks. And so you go back to those great South Carolina teams years ago, Jadeveon Clowney, they were good up front. This South Carolina team is not good up front. I don't believe the quarterback is a question mark. And so I just bring all that up to say that I had a lot of questions about this team coming into the season. And I don't want to say that they weren't answered because they were kind of answered the way that I expected. I just don't think South Carolina is a really good team right now. As a matter of fact, we're going to talk about Arkansas in a second, who looked better than expected. Vanderbilt, who beat Virginia Tech. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. By the way, Mississippi State put up close to 60 points in their season opener. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that South Carolina is the worst team in this league. We'll get into that, but let's start with their week 1 game against Old Dominion, because listen, final score is 23-19 in that one, and I get it. It's week 1. You don't want to overreact. You don't want to get too high for the teams that look really good. You don't want to get too low for the teams that look really bad. But what was crazy about this game, if you watch closely, this wasn't one of those fluky games where, it's a 1-score game because South Carolina has 5 turnovers, or it's a fluky game because somebody's hurt or 3 starters are suspended. Old Dominion was every bit as good as South Carolina. Old Dominion actually outgained South Carolina in this game by about 15 yards. They had over 300 yards of total offense. South Carolina under 300 yards. Old Dominion, by the way, had 4 turnovers in this game, which I think is scary if you're South Carolina. If Old Dominion doesn't keep giving you the ball back, there is a chance you are going to lose this game. And so as I look ahead to Saturday in Lexington, I'll be honest, my official pick, my official best bet is Kentucky minus 10.5. Now, at first, my first glance opinion on this game was to just take the under. One thing that I have been very successful in, and I'm not saying that I'm the perfect bettor or college football expert, but you bet again, you bet on the unders in Mark Stoops games. That's generally a pretty safe bet. But I think this Kentucky offense might be improved just enough, and I think the South Carolina defense is just bad enough where I do believe there's a possibility that this could get ugly for Kentucky. One thing about Kentucky, I put this stat out on Twitter, by the way. People got mad at me, not Kentucky fans, but pretty much non-Kentucky fans, saying it's a bogus stat. You know that Kentucky, since the end of that 2020 COVID season where every game was an SEC game, if you remember back to that year, so 2021, 22, 23, 24, Kentucky has now won its last 14 September games, dating back again to that 2020 COVID season. And so you look at the last 4 seasons, they have not lost in September. Now, why people think that's a bogus stat, I understand that the schedule has generally been front-loaded with a lot of group of 5 teams, maybe an FCS team here or there. But remember, they beat Vandy and Florida last year in SEC play in September. They have had SEC wins in September in previous years as well. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because I think Kentucky fans think that I don't like Mark Stoops. It has nothing to do with liking Mark Stoops. I have my criticisms of him. Think he whines sometimes too much about NIL and things of that nature. But one thing about Mark Stoops, early in the season, his teams largely take care of business. And so I think it happens again. They have the better quarterback. They have the better wide receiver group. And I just don't buy into this South Carolina team. And by the way, this is the one team, you never want injuries. I get it. But if your starting running back is banged up, this is the team that you wanted to happen against because, again, South Carolina, I just don't think they're that good up front. And so if there's ever a game to kind of, for lack of a better term, let Brock Vandagriff cook, let him throw the ball around, rely on your defense, I think this is the game. South Carolina has a running quarterback, Sellers, that we have not seen in his short career, that he can be a consistent passing threat. I think that plays into that fast and aggressive defensive front for the Kentucky Wildcats. And then again, when Kentucky has the football, I think they're going to let Brock Vandagriff air it out. One, because I think, you brought him there to let him cook. Obviously, with the new offensive coordinator, you want to let him kind of get comfortable in the SEC. And again, with the injuries at the tailback position, it almost makes sense to go ahead and probably throw the ball a little bit more than you would, especially, again, against a South Carolina defensive front that just isn't that good. So I could go on, but I think that Kentucky defense early in the year, there's not a lot of injuries. So I think that's part of why Kentucky has had success early. Maybe don't have the depth of a Georgia, a Tennessee, a whoever, but you get early in the year, their frontline guys are really, really, really good. So I'm going on. I'm going on too much, but give me Kentucky. I think this could get ugly, to be honest. I think this is like a 31-10 final score. I think they win. I think they cover. I think the under is probably the smart side, but I'd stay away from the under, and I'll go ahead and take the best bet of Kentucky minus 10.5.